So welcome everybody to this, our first webinar launch to introduce the Climate and Ecological Bill. I'm going to be one of your hosts, and so I'd like to introduce you to the other people who will be speaking here. So we have Dr. Amy McDonnell, and who is a member of the Citizen Assembly Working Group and one of the co-coordinators of the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill team. And we have Charles Secrett, who will introduce himself, I think, so our special guest. And we have Alex Bradbury, who is our Ninja Tech and also will be our Q&A host. And he's also a member of the Citizen Assembly Working Group and a very talented scriptwriter. So this is really exciting. It's our first online launch, and I would call it really a ripple before the big splash. So we're leading up to this in a sort of a wave of momentum. Just a bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and it will be used for uploading for public viewing. So the host has muted everyone for now, and keep your cameras off if you don't want to be in view. So let me just give you an idea of the structure of this webinar. So firstly, we're going to look at how the CEE Bill was conceived within XR. We're going to look at the bill itself and the campaign, and the idea that it's going to be steered and supported by an alliance of players in civil society, business, organisations, individuals, and that XR is one of its staunch backers. So just to clarify that this CEE bill is not an XR bill. So we'll begin with opening the story of this CEE bill's origins, followed by the content of the bill and journeys past, present, future, and the ultimate ambition. Then once we've done the chat, it will be about hopefully no longer than an hour, less if possible. This will be followed by a Q&A, half an hour Q&A. So what we'd like you to do is during the time of the conversation that you submit your questions in the Zoom chat, because then Alex will be able to collate them and field them, and then he will be posing the questions to Amy, Charles, and to me. And then at the very end, Amy will give us some very vital leads and links. So, like all good stories, let's begin with the background. So over to you, Amy.
Thanks, Nessy. Oh, it's so exciting to see you all. And we've been working away in the background on this for a long time. So it's just so good to kind of release some of this energy into the world and let you know what's going on. So this is really great. So I'm just going to really briefly, like Nessy say a little bit about the background to you, just to let you know. So the bill actually began life a lot earlier on, and it was the idea of someone called Steve Shaw, who is part of an organisation, Powerful People, or runs it, and they write a lot of bills, all with ecological and environmental aims to try and push the government and change legislation. So it was his idea. He approached Extinction Rebellion and said, look, what you can do is you can get your 3 demands into law, and this is a really good tool and a really good way to campaign and to push things and to push your agenda. So we ran a campaign during the general election, and we got over 200 candidates to support the bill, which was actually really, it was huge. We were really still running on the fly, really going with it, and I think we started the campaign kind of during the election. So it was quite, we were really, really pleased with that. And we've set up this lobbying network and got people really involved in the grassroots. But what we found that was very, very frustrating was this concept of political viability. And with the XR 2025 date, it was just a real way for people to shun us and say, nope, it was just immediate shutdown. So then we went on to go and speak to lots of top scientists, as Nessy will tell you shortly, to kind of expand out the content, really draw in a lot more on biodiversity, and also to make sure that the bill is framed around scientific fact and what the top scientists are telling us we need, rather than arguing about this kind of political viability of dates. And we also really wanted to not just be XR presenting this bill, but to open it out. So we've worked with Steve in Power of People, we're working with other individuals. So this really is now has become an alliance bill that we're going to grow and add on other organisations that we're currently speaking to that I will not name right now. So that's the kind of the history of it. So it has been housed in XR, but now it's moved out. It's a lot broader, a lot wider, and the content is a lot richer as well. Nessy, over to you.
Thank you, Amy. So just a little bit of how I got on board. Whilst Amy and Alex were doing all this work on the 3 Demands Bill before the election, post-election, I had been doing a few sort of interviews, videos with some experts to get their views and on the 3 demands actually, and particularly in the second demand around the carbon net zero by 2025. And it was really interesting because during this these videos, I got a lot of their views, really people who were not actually weren't XR rebels as such, but they were academics, scientists who were very supportive of Extinction Rebellion, but when it came to their views on, for example, the 2025 date, they would often describe it as a proxy for Act Now, or also symbolic of the precautionary principle that we must act even though we may not know the full facts. You know, our humanity is in grave danger, so therefore we must treat it as an emergency. So many of these experts supported the 3 Demands Bill in principle. So this got us talking, and Amy and I, there was the Tim Jackson CUSP paper, which came out in 2019, and it was titled Zero Carbon Sooner, and it was very much based on the IPCC's UN report about how we would have, if we could take a certain emissions pathway, we'd have a 66% chance of limiting global atmospheric temperatures to 1.5 centigrade above pre-industrial levels. So we started to have a base, if you like, a foundation on which to build. So we were really fortunate that we managed to get a Zoom with Professor Tim Jackson, and this followed with Professor Kevin Anderson, and we talked about how, or particularly he said, make the bill more about framework and principles rather than it being prescriptive, so that it's agile, but there was an emphasis on the principles we wanted to achieve. And this followed with a meeting with Dr. Charlie Gardner and Professor Dave Golson, who is a world specialist in bees, and they came up with this strong argument of the idea that, yes, whilst we obviously have to look at climate, equally we have to look at ecology, and that they must be approached through this bill, approached as 2 sides of the same coin, so shoulder to shoulder significance and weight. So we generated more and more ideas, and we had great contributions from experts, and they have been acknowledged as on the bill. So they're, just to emphasize, they are contributing their expertise, so that this is quite separate from those who endorse the bill at the moment. This is what the campaign's about. So the other amazing opportunity was that we had also expert contributions from UN IPCC lead author on the 1.5 report. So this was another incredible opportunity. We did have other experts as well have made wonderful contributions, and they are all listed on the CEE Bill briefing. So I think I must get on to the actual content of the bill. So let me just go to that. So, as I said, there are two sides of the same coin in this bill. So the CEE Bill is built on the foundations of the UN Paris Agreement. So most of you will know more or less what this is. It's a set of pledges by nations to a global response to the threat of climate change, or we should say global heating now, by keeping a global temperature rise this century to well below 2 degrees Celsius, but to pursue efforts to limit temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius. You know, we know from the emerging and evolving science, there's incontrovertible evidence, there's a massive difference between a 1.5 degrees warming and a 2, and each tiny increment has devastating real world effects. So then we also, on the flip side, we needed to acknowledge that in this common goal, going back to the Paris Agreement, there's a sense of equity, so that acknowledging some nations must take greater responsibility and move faster depending on their social and economic circumstances. Now, we in the UK, in the minority world, are one of those privileged countries. Of course, we were birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. So we have a lot of responsibility to move faster with greater responsibility. So the bill itself, the flip side of the coin is that it addresses the devastating crisis in nature with equal urgency. So we're looking at nature's biodiversity, including its loss of habitats, of species abundance, and in its species extinction, and its degradation through land pollution, extraction of natural resources, and the accumulation of waste. This all off the back of our consumption. Of course, we've got to remember this would be UK legislation, so we have to imagine that from the UN perspective, we are taking our part as the UK. So we are actually, when it looks at, for example, the temperature holding to 1.5, we can't, as a nation, hold a global temperature to 1.5. So we make our contribution consistent to that aim. And it's the same with, of course, the ecology. We're looking at our own on UK soil, but also looking at how we affect overseas through our consumption. So just some pointers on the bill itself. So if this bill were to be put into law, it would create a plan to completely reduce carbon emissions in real terms with immediate effect. So it will be greatly accelerated, because we have certain stipulations within the bill that makes us have to do this. So calculate the entire carbon footprint of the UK, including emissions caused internationally through import and export. So we're calculating both production and consumption emissions. So everything we produce and use, which is we're always bound up in emissions, in emissions output, we need to account for this. Then to actively conserve and restore nature here in the UK, with focus on both biodiversity and soils protection, and also to produce robust ways in how to evaluate how we are doing this, how we are implementing this action. So actively mitigating the damage to nature along the UK supply chains, both on UK soil and internationally. About, I believe, almost 50% at least of our consumption comes from imports. So we've outsourced a lot of our emissions. And the bill calls for accountability on the devastating impact on the natural world as a consequence of our consumption demands through the production and transportation of the material goods we want. Then another stipulation is to reduce reliance on speculative future carbon capture technologies, the technologies that suck out the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And in terms of the energy sector, so all the sector that is involved in energy, whether we output or what we use, that in the bill, we would exclude the potential use of negative emissions technology. But there would be an acknowledgement of actively restoring and increasing our natural carbon sink, such as the conservation of woodlands, forests, restoring peat bogs, and the overall vital function of soils. Because as we know, the soils are one of our greatest natural reservoirs for keeping carbon out of the atmosphere. And finally, and very importantly, is to create a citizens' assembly so that people have the real say forward in bringing social equity into the decision making of how to achieve the objective. So I'm going to go over to Amy, who will explain a little bit more about why a citizens' assembly.
Great, thank you so much, Nessy. So yeah, as Nessy was saying, the bill is surrounded with these. Basically, it's a wish list from the scientists that we were speaking about how to really tighten the government's response to the climate crisis. And this would mean that they have to act so much faster and quicker than they are now. So this is exactly what we want. But it's really, really important to involve citizens in that decision-making process. It's obviously lifestyles will have to change. It's going to be a sort of emergency scenario where big changes will have to happen quickly. So it's really, really important that we are all involved in how that's done, and that we are all sort of aware of why things are being done and the options that we have available to us as a country. And some of you might be aware of the Climate Assembly UK, which has now come to an end. And you might think, well, this has already been done, so why are we calling for another one? But this Citizens' Assembly, it was set up by 6 select committees, and it was set up by the select committees actually before the election. So this means that the heads or the chairs of the select committees have now changed. Lots have become now conservative, so there's been a bit of a shift there. So even the body that set it up might not be fully in agreement with it. And the government haven't come out to say that they endorse it or what their response is going to be with it. So it's a weakened Citizens' Assembly. And also, of course, there's the fact that it's working towards the date of 2050, which we know is just way too late. So although it's been very well set up, and we fully appreciate the way that it's been run, it just can go nowhere near. It's all focused in the wrong direction, basically. The Citizens' Assembly in this bill is a lot more tied into the machinations of the runnings of Parliament and government. So we kind of see it as this system where the 3 are working together, which is really, really important. So that the recommendations that are put forward by the Citizens' Assembly have to be taken seriously, they have to be debated and discussed. And the report that's produced at the end as well can be both looked at by government and by the Citizens' Assembly. And if the strategy that's been produced in the system where the 3 are working together, and still the Citizens' Assembly doesn't believe that it is working to our objectives, so to go hard and fast enough, then they can adjust the strategy and go into discussions so that there's always this mechanism where the three are working hand in hand. And I think I'm passing back to Nessy.
Thank you. Thanks, Amy. So now I'd love to introduce you all to Charles, because we realised we needed sage advice and practical guidance on how to get where we want to get to. So Charles is our absolute pro on this very journey of campaigning resulting in legislation. So over to you, Charles, please.
Oh, you just have to unmute yourself there, Charles.
Yeah, that was very funny. I was just asking if my voice was coming across okay. So is my voice coming across okay now? Is that all right? Yeah, good, wave, wonderful. Okay, well, it's great that you're all here. We're at the beginning of something very exciting. This bill is a very important part of that excitement. And I want to talk with you a little bit, just outline for you my experience of a particular type of campaign, a campaign that can win and can overturn parliaments. It sounds too good to be true, but it actually is very real. I've been a member of XR since the beginning, in this country anyway. I've been a member of the Bill team for the last 6-7 months. Getting the bill has been has been a long process, and partly it's been long because it's been involving. And this campaign is about involving people. It's about building, in a weird way, it's about building a political power base that will see this bill become law. And this type of campaign has been run before, and it's been run successfully. This type of campaign was actually what made the Climate Change Act pass. Started off as a private member's bill drafted by a couple of NGOs, and then built momentum over 4 years. And that was always in the face of government opposition. It was never an easy ride. And it wasn't just that one act that became, there are a dozen others where the same campaign model was applied. So we know it works. We know there's certain things about this campaign model that are easy to do, very replicable, and extremely positive. Political decisions are about power. You know, that's the type of government that we have. Government is there to exercise power, to make decisions about budgets, about laws, about investment, about all the things that shape society. And apart from armed insurrection, there are only 3 ways in which political power is exercised in our parliamentary democracy. The first is if you become government. If you're a party, you win the most votes and you become government. The second way is if you get something into the manifesto of the party that becomes government, and that government actually delivers on that manifesto commitment. But the third way is if Parliament, our representatives, all our MPs and the Lords, demand of government that something happens. Something like this bill, a law being passed. And this campaign is about mobilizing people, all sorts of different organizations across the country at a constituency level. Because the whole point about representative government, our legislature, the parliament, is that we vote those people in. They're dependent on us for our votes in every single constituency. And what this bill offers is a very powerful opportunity to knit together constituencies and make a demand of government that is an imperative. The detail of the bill is really important. And the bill will be sent out to everybody so you can see it with a briefing document to help explain what the clauses are and how they all fit together and what the purpose of the bill is. But basically the purpose of the bill is to make sure that the government, our government, goes into COP26 in 18 months' time, November 2021, with a firm commitment that the UK economy and society will gear towards meeting 1.5 degrees centigrade as our contribution to managing temperature increase to something science says will be tolerable. It won't be pleasant, but it'll be tolerable if we act now. And we have a fantastic science case for why 1.5 is so important, which is the overwhelming objective of the bill, with all these other essential supplementary clauses going in to support that. Perhaps even more importantly than the science case is we can make an economic case. We can argue convincingly with evidence that the type of economy that will arise out of meeting 1.5, of following a transition, a route map, a plan to lower our emissions, build our sinks, regenerate our wildlife and our habitats, tackle forestry, agriculture, energy, buildings, transport, manufacturing, demonstrating how these things change in a way that's positive, that creates hundreds of thousands of jobs, not just nationally, but in every single constituency. Funnily enough, particularly in constituencies that get screwed over by Brexit, because many of these jobs, whether it's energy efficiency or renewables or localized farming and localized economy, are skilled, but they're easy to pick up and organize around. And then we have a social case. We know from what happens when climate goes bonkers that it's people who are poor, disadvantaged, disempowered who suffer the most. This bill is about social justice as much as it is about economic prosperity, about efficiency, about modernization of the economy, about doing the right thing from a science point of view. And it's also a moral case. We have so much to be positive about arguing for this bill in every constituency. And we've got 18 months to do it. And along the way, for the decision making for COP26, for the government making up its mind what it's going to be doing in preparing its position, for Parliament discussing, for this bill finding ways in which to enter parliamentary debate. And there are stepping stones along the way, each of which provides an opportunity for campaigning, for renewing, going back to the MP, for renewing pressure on government, for renewing press work, but above all, for building alliances. This type of campaign works because of the alliances one can build, not just across the whole spectrum of NGOs, development, environmental, democracy, anti-poverty, but across unions, churches, professional associations, the Women's Institute, Small Business Federation, all the different green industries and their associations. We can have lawyers and economists as well as scientists building this type of alliance. And so many of the national groups have local chapters. So there are opportunities here to spread the network, not just throughout every constituency, but across the land. And by constantly demanding and arguing for things that make common sense, you can create political activism that takes evidence and makes it count. Because all the time, we're building up voters who are asking their MPs or their candidates, are you going to support the bill? If you don't support the bill, we're not going to vote for you. And the problem with so much traditional NGO campaigning is that it's necessary. The marches, the evidence gathering, the social media, but unless it bites at the ballot box, unless MPs feel that they are going to lose, you basically get the brush off. Apart from particular victories. Of course, there are always particular victories, but what we're asking for now is something much more fundamental. That this type of organization really can work. There was a climate emergency a year ago. Nothing has happened since. The the situation has got worse. Every year counts. Not just to lower the emissions, but to create those jobs. And the rebellions and the social media and all the other activities that will go on throughout these 18 months, all part and parcel of building, if you like, a snowball effect. And I'm just about to finish, but I want to finish on this one point. At first, government will dismiss us. And there will be all sorts of opponents who will crawl out of the woodwork, and the opposition will build up. And then, as more and more people support us, and as the arguments become clearer and the evidence more convincing, we'll get polite hearings. And then we'll be told it's impractical, it can't be done. And then the attacks will begin and the belittling. But if we keep going, they'll crumble. And we'll get support. We'll get support from opposition parties and we'll get support from within the governing party. And all we need to do is to persuade, using reason and evidence, and demonstrably a better path around a campaign thing that works, opportunities inside and outside of Parliament. We can win this if we get organised, if we mobilise, and if we inspire. And that's really what this bill is about. It could be a bill, it could be a budget, it could be a manifesto, but we've got the bill as a focal point. And there's no more important thing to win over the next 18 months for all these reasons. And we can do it. It's been done, we can do it again.
Thank you so much, Charles. I just wanted to ask you, just on that point, I know you're at the end of your tenure as Director of Friends of the Earth, but can you just tell me that the first, you always tell us that the first 6 months, you were really quite on your own as an organisation with the Big Ask?
Yeah, the Big Ask campaign was the campaign for the Climate Change Act. That's what we called it. And I was at Friends of the Earth, well, actually, I was at Friends of the Earth for 2 lots of 10 years, once in the 80s and once in the 90s and early 2000s. But I left in 2003 and we had just begun the Big Ask campaign. And at the beginning, I suppose that is actually the first of the 7 steps. It's a -1 step or a 0 step. No one wants to know. It's something new. People are locked into what they're already doing. For campaigning organisations, you're planning a year in advance. And this may well fit, it does fit, just like the Climate Change Act fitted, with all sorts of other things that other organisations who we want as allies, as in an alliance, are already committed to. So there's inevitably a period of chipping away, of going and having meetings, of persuading, of demonstrating. And that's what we've begun doing with Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, with Caroline Lucas now, who's come out in support of the bill, with a bunch of scientists. So we just keep going and that snowball will pick up speed.
And
that was exactly what happened with the Climate Change Act. And then after 6 months, even though we're living in a Zoom world, and a lot of the things we're going to have to be doing are remotely, like this meeting, rather than having public hall meetings, we've still got the communication tools to be able to make this effective and to keep the pressure on. We've already, XR activists have already had Zoom meetings with MPs.
And crucially, of course, we're in the context of post-COVID, well, not necessarily recovery, but we're in the post-COVID economic fallout, aside from the terrible toll on health. So this becomes even more critical, this timing. So over to Amy now, because Amy's going to describe what we've learnt from Charles and how we can go forward.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Charles. Yeah, I think it's really heartening to hear that this kind of thing works. And I think it's even more heartening to know that, you know, before these processes often start in this wasteland, but already we're here. So that already, the fact that you are all here is an amazing thing. And also the fact that we've got in Extinction Rebellion, there's the rebellion coming up on outside Parliament, starting on the 1st of September. And with Extinction Rebellion, a lot of noise will be being made around the bill that will help us also form an alliance with the other people we're in conversation with currently. So all of this sort of immediately gives this big energy and this big push in a way that is really exceptional and different and can be really, really powerful. So we're really excited that you're here, basically. And just to let you know, as I think Charles was saying earlier on as well, you know, you really are powerful and your MP really does care about what you think. So if you go and speak to them, if you introduce the bill to them, if you set up, and obviously now you can't necessarily go face to face, but rather than meeting in a village hall or meeting in their office with lots of friends, family, people you know, we're suggesting that people set up Zoom meetings, which quite rapidly can look very full. Like now, we're not 200 people, but I'm sure if I were an MP, I'd be worried. I'd be thinking, oh my God, I need to take this seriously. Look at all these faces on my screen. So as of, I'm just going to quickly show you this, although I will also show it at the end, but just so you've got this information and you can start writing it down. We've got the CEE Bill at protonmail.com email address where you can ask us any further questions. Do follow us on Twitter at CEEBill_now. We're on the Extinction Rebellion site already. There's a bit more information that's going to be, we're going to keep teasing it out as the week goes on and next week, but that's extinctionrebellion.uk/CEE-bill. And launching on Friday is our independence. So we're sort of, yes, we're working as Extinction Rebellion, but we're also working as this other organisation alongside other individuals and other campaign groups, and that will be ceebill.uk. So do check that out on Friday, because there will be, let me stop sharing. There'll be a big button where you can join up to the campaign and you can find out more about how to get involved and this sort of action of lobbying and all these excellent things that we would really appreciate if you want to get involved with as well. But don't worry, I'll show that again at the end in case you didn't get it.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much, Amy. So we're just going to have a really, really like 1 minute recap with this a slide just on the content of the bill in the simplest form before our plenary. So hopefully everyone can see that, and if it's quite small, I'll read it out. So the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill calls for a serious plan to deal with our fair share of emissions and halt critical rises in global temperatures. So referring to that Paris Agreement to 1.5 centigrade. Then our entire carbon footprint be taken into account, both in the UK and overseas. And on the flip side, we're looking at also, of course, those supply chains that cause so much ecological devastation along the way and chaos. The active conservation of nature here and overseas, recognizing the damage we cause through the goods we import. There's just to say, there's an amazing WWF report. They commissioned a report on the UK's carbon footprint. It's definitely worth having a look at that one. It was commissioned, I think it came out last year. Those in power are not to depend on future technologies to save the day. These technologies are used as an excuse for us to carry on polluting. In the bill, it really specifies separate accounting of the real reductions in emission, as opposed to anything that is accounted for through natural carbon sinks, and any of the emissions technologies that are used in either the agricultural sector or the construction sectors. And then finally, but not least of all, ordinary people have a real say on the right way forward in the form of a citizens' assembly with bite. And that's, of course, all locked in to what this bill is proposing. So now we're going to go to our plenary session Q&A. I think, Amy, did you want to have a final slide? Very important.
Amy, you need to unmute.
Sorry, have I gone off my screen share now?
Yeah, you also, I think so. Yeah.
We are there. So I think we're now over to the questions.
Great. Okay. That's me. Thanks, guys. That's I found that so interesting. I've been obviously a little bit involved in this process, but not massively, and it was really, really interesting to hear all of it summarized. So impressive, actually. Thanks everybody as well for your questions. We've got quite a good few. I think we probably have the chance to squeeze in a few more as well. So do keep them coming, and I'll hopefully keep track of things. They look really, really interesting, and I'm really excited to hear some of the answers. I think let's dive in with something. I think maybe you started to answer this actually, but just to clarify, can I find a list of MPs who have supported the bill so far? Amy, do you want to take that?
Yes. So we are. So like I said, with the earlier iteration of the bill, we managed to get lots of support, and that was during the election. So it was a real key time to push and try and get support. We have been thus far really building support amongst scientists, getting their advice, doing that piece of work, getting it ready, really getting it ready for its launch. So we actually see September the 1st, when Extinction Rebellion will be outside Parliament, we kind of see that as our parliamentary launch. So basically now we're saying it's over to you guys, it's over to people, this grassroots campaign model for people to really go and speak to their MPs, because it can't just come from us, it has to come from everyone, and really to let people know that we all care. So now is the time to start making this happen and start gathering those signatures, and we hope that it can be tabled really soon. And that means that the bill gets presented in the House of Commons. Its title will be presented, and that sets the bill off on its journey. So the bill, you know, there are lots of different stages, and once it gets going, it will ping pong between the House of Commons and the Lords before it reaches Royal Assent, it's called, which is where it becomes law. So this, if it's tabled, so if it's presented before Parliament and its name read out, then that's it on its first stage, off it goes. And one MP can put it forward, but up to 12 can put their signature to it for that presentation of the bill. But obviously, we could have 200, 300 MPs under that saying they support. And in the end, we need a majority of MPs saying they support it to really push it through into law. And we know we haven't got time. We are in a crisis. We really need to get going. So we're not going to be slow about this. And we're saying, yeah, let's get MPs on board as of now. It's all go.
Great, thanks, Amy. Nice rousing end. So I'm maybe just gonna, well, one technical thing. Amy, the request to put the last image up again, but I wonder if you could cut and paste possibly all of those addresses into the chat. That might be easier, thanks. And maybe I'll just put two questions together for Charles. One is, again, it's sort of probably covering a little bit of what Amy's saying. Are we saying that this can be done within the current system? And then also combined with that, why is it a private members bill when they really rarely become law? And you need to unmute, sorry.
Yeah, thanks. Private members' bills that just try and, weave their way through Parliament without any grassroots or national support do often fail unless the government signals that they will support it. But I mean, just to show you how easy it is to block a private member's bill, when it gets to its second reading in the Commons, when they have and that's if you're chosen high up the ballot, because there's a ballot of MPs to choose private members' bills right at the very beginning of the parliamentary year. Say you get into the top 6 and an MP takes your bill forward, our bill forward, goes into its second reading in the Commons. Amazingly, just one MP has to stand up and keep talking until there's no more time, and the bill will fall. And then the whole process has to be begun again. So, yeah, the basis of what you're saying is right. It's a very fragile route through Parliament that can easily be disrupted. And that may be what will happen the first time round. But what also happens is if we build this type of alliance at a constituency level with the type of organisations that I very briefly described, then one can build up sufficient pressure on MPs within their constituents where enough voters, enough local organisations, whether they're business or social or NGO or professional or whatever, are saying, we want this bill to become law, that's when the MPs go back. And they go back to the whips, their leaders, and say, this bill needs to become law. And all I can tell you is that the 12 times we've organised this type of campaign around a private member's bill, some of which have been major pieces of legislation, some of which have been much smaller pieces, all of which have been opposed by the government of the day, we've persuaded enough MPs to persuade the government to adopt the bill. So can it be done? Yeah. Is it often done? No. But this is a model that does deliver. And it's not just about, I don't know, in a sense, we're having to persuade society. It's not just MPs that we're trying to persuade. We're trying to persuade our neighbours, our friends, our family, our colleagues, the people that we go to voluntary meetings with. And that's the push outwards and involve those people. We have that opportunity in a parliamentary democracy, and it does work. I hope that answered the questions, both of them.
Yeah, I think it does. I'll be the judge for the purpose of it. So yeah, let's get, there's such a range of questions. Oh my God, amazing. Really good. We've got a lot about sort of XR's involvement and then nitty-gritty questions about campaigning, but also nitty-gritty questions about the bill itself. So I think let's move to that, Nessy, for a moment. One from Eddie here, it's quite a long one. How does the bill aim to bring about reduction in emissions in states other than those under UK legislature? Are there several states under UK legislature? Anyway, okay, and whatever that means, the place that is under UK legislature, the UK, is there any proviso for dealing with the problem outside the UK? I'm asking because although dealing with the UK's contribution to climate change, it seems to me to be moot without some effort to tackling the problem in other parts of the world where there is a far higher proportion of culpability.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because the foundations of the bill are based on a global pledge through the Paris Agreement. But yeah, we have limited scope in actually influencing other nations. Of course, this will be UK legislature. But what we're seeing is that if this could be a possible blueprint that could be repeated throughout many nations, particularly with emphasis on the minority world, not the majority world. It's the minority world that actually has the hugest carbon footprint. So I think that's the most we can hope for. I mean, I've already spoken to people. I know it's within the XR sort of eco bubble, if you like, or echo chamber, but so many of the global XR nation groups are really interested in it and thinking, because of the kind of agility of the bill and the way it's framed on principles and framework, that oh, maybe this could be so adapted, because every other country has, of course, its own forms of, particularly in countries that have types of party democracies that run, and or they have constitutional law. So certainly I've been speaking to people on the European continent about it. All I can say is that within the bill, there's a responsibility for the UK to acknowledge its fair share of carbon debt, and also the fact that, of course, through its consumption emissions, all those emissions we outsource in our products that we import, that we must account for those in our carbon budgets. When we, at the moment, the Climate Committee for Climate Change, that are advisors to the government, they put forward 5-yearly budgets, carbon budgets, and for the government, they're meant to, you know, abide by those budgets and contained in those. And what the bill does is tighten those, because we have these stipulations around consumption emissions and the supply chains, and not including negative emission technologies for the energy sector. It really tightens up those budgets. It means we're restricted much more, and in a much more accelerated pace, to how much real reductions we should actually adhere to. But yes, there are limits to the scope. Obviously, this is not legislation global. Unfortunately, the United Nations, we had a global government with real bite. The United Nations is an organization that is built on pledges rather than actual basis of ecocide global law. Imagine if we had that. But we're starting small, so we're trying to take our UK's full responsibility. But yeah, the vision, imagine how amazing if this were a blueprint for other nations to adopt, particularly those that have sort of a similar, particularly of the you know, the G5, for example, or G7. Those are the minority world who really need to move the fastest. Has that, I hope that's answered as well as I can in my limited capacity.
Yeah, no, that was super comprehensive, Nessy. Thank you. Let's stay with the content of the bill for a moment, if that's okay. I'm just going to group a couple of questions here together for Amy. Does the bill include stopping making things worse? And I still feel the 2025 target is unrealistic, and I don't know how I would persuade my MP otherwise.
Great, thanks for that, Alex. Starting with the last one first. So at the moment, that's exactly why we sort of shifted our focus of this bill. So no longer is there the 2025 date in the bill, but that doesn't mean that it's not radical or that it's not tight. So the reason we removed the 2025, because it was this issue of political viability. So i.e. that's politicians saying, no one's going to go for this, no way, we're not going to touch it, sorry, bye. And that's hugely frustrating when you're dealing with something that's scientific and that's factual and that is the reality. So we've moved from having this 2025 focus to focusing on rises in global temperature, which is the 1.5, which goes back to the Paris Agreement. So if we can all agree, and you know, top scientists in the UN say we need to keep to that, so we're at the most radical end of that, which is keeping to 1.5. If we all agree that that is our goal, and obviously they even tell us what happens between 1.5 and 2 and the differences, and how even though it seems like such a small rise in temperature, the impact is huge. So if that's what we're agreeing to, screw political viability, this is a scientific fact, so how do we work to this? And what Nessy was saying about, you know, it's about principles and frameworks within the bill. We sort of create this framework, and then it's actually the Citizens' Assembly, and through that work with Parliament and government, where the kind of policy and the how, that, okay, well, we need to stick within this tight framework. We need to include our consumption emissions. So that's all the emissions around things we consume. That actually increases our emissions by 46%. So if you think now that the government is saying, well, you know, 2050, and so we're saying, no, well, actually, that's a lie. There's double the amount of emissions we need to account for. So we need to work to such a really quick time frame. So although there's not the 2025 there, we do want to reassure you that it's still set within really tight, realistic, scientific boundaries that tell us we need to get going immediately. And the other one was, how do we make things not get worse? We've actually really, that's a really good question, because we've really, especially when we're thinking about nature, biodiversity, we have this, we make sure that we include this concept of actively conserving. So it's not just stopping polluting, and that's in the UK on our soil and all along all the supply chains internationally. So yeah, stop polluting, stop damaging, but more than that, don't make it worse, actively conserve. And it's really important that we conserve both to draw carbon out of the atmosphere, you know, peats, soils, forests, these are natural sinks, so these naturally capture all of that carbon that's in the air, but also for their own, for biodiversity, for us to have, you know, this diversity, and for us, for the health of all of these ecosystems. So good questions, thank you.
Charles, did you want to add something there?
Just very briefly, which is that throughout, well, certainly the beginning and throughout the next 18 months, we'll be producing briefing sheets and reports that provide the evidence and the argument and the examples, whether it's making the science case or the economic case or the social justice case or whatever. So it's not that you're being sort of asked to go out there on your own in any way at all. The campaign will build up materials in all sorts of ways, and including actions and events, such as the first rebellion on the 1st. And there's something else about, which maybe I didn't emphasize enough. Local authorities are hugely sympathetic. There are over 200 local authorities, and we can provide a list that have already signed up to much tougher targets and timetables for achieving them in terms of emission reductions in their areas than the government has signed up to. So there's lots of fertile ground out there in definitely Labour and Liberal Democrat and Green administrations at all levels of councils, you know, from parish up to county, not just town. So there's that's another big opportunity.
Great, thank you, Charles. So maybe just sort of some housekeeping in terms of the process. I'm just thinking, we've had so many questions now, which is great. We do have half an hour left, and we can get through quite a few, I think. We might not get through them all, so just a kind of shout out that to get in touch afterwards and stay in touch, and you can get anything answered that doesn't get answered here. But another request to the panel, to going forward, let's keep, if we can keep it a bit shorter, the answers, if that's okay, sorry. And then we can try and get through as many of these as possible. Let's come back to the nitty-gritty of the bill, just to kind of get a bit more of a flavour of different aspects of the campaign. And we'll come back to the nitty-gritty of the bill. So XR's involvement. Nessy, if I can come to you again. So I'll just group a couple of, but all of these actually, if that's okay. So will this be perceived as an XR initiative, or are you trying to present it as an alliance from the launch? And how will the campaign be best supported, conversely, best supported by XR actions around Parliament in September?
I will probably call on on Amy too for this one, but for the first question, definitely although it was sort of birthed within XR, it is definitely seen, we want it to be seen as a standalone bill, certainly not branded in any way with XR's logo. It just so happens that it came from our movement and not another, but it's really important that it's seen as an organic bill that's of an alliance of organizations and movements and green movements, because it was just so important. When I remember when I did a lot of the filming, a lot of the thing was, how do we capture mainstream? How do you really get out there? Because within the little XR bubble, we need to get beyond. And so we've really, this is really important, that when you go out there, it's about XR fully backing this bill, absolutely as supporters, but it doesn't have ownership of the bill. It is a collective ownership of all the organizations and all the movements that really want to come on board. And that's what we're going through, that process now with Greenpeace, with Friends of the Earth, with the National Trust, and so on. The other question was about September the 1st, which I know is around still the XR's own 3 demands. But we will definitely be in Parliament Square, I believe, and we will be trying to engage in discussions around the bill, and also to encourage, I mean, we know about this tabling as well around the same time. So it's really about amplifying the message so that MPs know about it, and then getting them sort of engaged in this debate. As I say, we're very lucky to have a certain MP who's willing to table. Maybe Amy can take a little bit more from.
Yeah, thanks, Nessy. Just to kind of reassure you, we're not being tricky here. This is a sort of normal part of a campaign process, you know, with the Big Ask campaign, so for the Climate Change Act. Originally it was housed within Friends of the Earth, but it wasn't a Friends of the Earth bill. People came on board. It maybe took a few months for them to come on board, as Charles was saying earlier on. But because I think we already have a lot of momentum behind this one, because we're in such a crisis and we really need to get going, I believe that we are, and already there are signs, like Nessy was hinting at, that there are actually several people that are floating around that are just, you know, we're able to be quite agile within Extinction Rebellion, but other organisations are running in a different way. So they might take a bit of a slower time to be able to officially endorse things. But that is a campaign procedure. Our team sits both in and outside of XR. And I think I was going to say that actually about the lobbying as well, how we all wear loads of different hats. And I think maybe not all of you are Extinction Rebellion here. I think there might be people from outside as well, but you also might be a member of Friends of the Earth. You also might sit on your local council. You also might, but I think that's how it works, isn't it? In so many of us who are passionate and care about the environment and what's going to happen to all of us. It's all very intermeshed and interweaving. So that's why we're creating this alliance. You know, it's not about Extinction Rebellion. It's not about Greenpeace or whoever else. It's about all of us being able to club together and around this concrete thing that is a bill to say to our governments, you're not doing enough, let's do this. And that's the idea.
Great, thank you, Amy. Just another one that I saw in the chat that I think I might be able to answer myself quickly is there an Alliance website, or is it only presented on the XR's website? Actually, no, I can't, sorry. Amy, can you just answer that one quickly?
Yes, I definitely can. So we are, so it's all, like we said, it's all getting moving this week. We are building a website as we speak, and it should be out there in its full form on Friday. So if you look out for CEE Bill.uk, but at the moment there is live on the Extinction Rebellion website, so extinctionrebellion.uk/CEE-bill. Again, I'll put these up again at the end. And there's information there. There's also an animation that's going to come on the 17th, which is really, Don't be scared, by the way, if you're thinking, I didn't understand any of that. It's so much information, because it really is. And we've been learning as well. And it's complex because science is complex, right? And the issue is complex. But this animation will explain it all in a really nice, beautiful way as well. So there are lots of materials to help all of us be able to explain it and really get the word out there. So the short answer is yes, there will be properly, it will be out there on Friday, and there and on the Extinction Rebellion part of the site there will be a big button that says join us. So if you want to join up to the campaign, learn more about how we're suggesting you lobby and who you can contact to really create this network, then check it out on Friday.
Great, thank you, Amy. Okay, got sort of three broad topics. We've still got many more questions about the content of the bill. We've got sort of the process, how the bill was put together, but we've got more questions about specific campaigning and the relative merits. So I'm going to go to hop over to the process of doing this, why this bill. So two questions here grouped together for Charles, if that's okay. Would we not be better to try and amend the Climate Change Act to ramp up action on CO2 now? And what has been learned from why the Climate Change Act was not enough to avert a climate emergency? The UK isn't on track to meet most already existing legal targets.
Thanks for that. So why not amend the Act? Well, that is a route that could have been done. In a weird way, it's more complicated to do it like that, because you're still looking for a vehicle in which you make the proposition to government or to Parliament. So that might well be a private member's bill. This bill provides a clear route from civil society, and therefore it supports what is written in about the Citizens' Assembly, just in and of itself. And I think that was, you know, when you weigh it up in the balance this way or that way, I think that as a private member's bill that's coming up sooner or later through a broad cross-section of civil society is very important, as well as it providing all the useful parliamentary steps and everything. And what it does do is, but not only do, is plug big holes in the Climate Change Act. The aviation emissions, shipping emissions, supply chain, right the way along the consumption, supply, production part of the economy. So it's that's a necessary thing to do, but it has to be seen in the context of the degree change, which actually is more important than the date. The date actually is a distraction. It's the degree change that we have to limit our emissions to and create sinks around. So being able to bring those other elements in as part of a package, and then of course the regeneration, the biodiversity for ecosystems, that's a very powerful set of demands, all of which make sense as a package. So again, I think that what we've learned is that we need to do these sorts of things to this temperature increase to stay on the right side of disaster. So I hope that answers both questions.
Yes, great. Thanks, Charles, and thanks also for answering some of the questions in the chat as well. I've seen, which is really good and helps us get through more. Sorry, there's a dog barking in the background. I don't know if you can hear that. Okay, let's move down to some specific campaigning questions, suggestions, critiques. Nessy, can I ask you? Is a petition for your MP to support the bill any use? Do you have a template email that we could use to send our MPs? Just maybe those two.
Thanks, Alex. And I'm going to pass on to Amy because she's actually much better informed than I.
Okay, sorry, go for it.
That's okay.
Thanks, everyone. Yes, so this is where these big buttons that will be available on Friday come in. So when you join the campaign, when you sign up, you'll receive a letter and it will go through all of these things with you, such as templates of tweets and also suggestions for how to run. What we're suggesting is to run whatever else it is, Microsoft Teams, whatever your favourite is. Set up these meetings with your MP to be able to have a conversation, but also you're right to write letters, and we've also sort of outlined some arguments that you could include in your letter. It's really important to make it personal. Basically, it's important to get across why you as an individual care and as a constituent. So it's not whether you're Friends of the Earth, XR, or anything else. You are their constituent and you really care about this issue, so therefore they have to, which is great for the campaign, and means that again you actually have real power and leverage. So that will all be out there. So those tools will be there. We're also really interested to hear from you about what's working, what's not working. We've got someone else called Pete who you might get to know, who is going to be working with us to help develop these Zooms. So if anyone has any issues or needs support, then we're always here, and you can always contact us on the email as well. But that kind of package for lobbying is being developed now and will be released on Friday.
Great, thanks Amy. Okay, there's some more detailed questions about campaigning, but I think I might, if it's okay, leave some of those just because we're staying in touch. So the more details, just basically you have to stay in touch anyway. So this is a kind of carrot to keep you in touch and get those questions answered. Let's go back to some of the content of the bill. And Nessy, maybe I can go to you for these ones. Specifically around this, maybe the Citizens' Assembly. Does the government have to take notice of the Citizens' Assembly? How is that worded? What is the undertaking of the bill for citizens' representatives? So for the Citizens' Assembly's recommendations to be taken as a decision making rather than consultative? It's really the same question actually from two different people.
That's a very good question. So within the actual, so if this were legislated for, that we have the objective, and then there is, in order to achieve this objective, we have a strategy. Because the objective is complex, we have a strategy as in how the objective will be achieved. And within the strategy, the Secretary of State or the government have to put out a tender for a Citizens' Assembly. And within the bill content, it's built in that a Citizens' Assembly is integral in the recommendations that come out of this strategy of how to achieve the bill's objective. And that these recommendations, at least those with 80% or higher consensus, will have to be built into the policy that meets the objectives to achieve the objectives. And this will be set into law. So already you've got very high consensus, 80% plus. Interestingly, I think with the French Citizens' Assembly, there was enormous consensus around the, I don't know, was it 105 recommendations, Alex? They came out of?
It was more like 150, about 150. 150,
yes. So that's very interesting to see what the process does. But also if there's, I think is it 2/3, I think, of consensus, then those decisions will be brought to Parliament for debate and a vote on those. And if the strategy, I think there's a lot of toing and froing in terms of, at some point, the definitive strategy, which has to meet the objective, that will have been a combination of the Citizens' Assembly with the government, and where there is not 80% consensus, Parliament must be involved in that, in debates and votes on those parts. However, just as a caveat, This hasn't been completely, these mechanisms are complex, and let's say for now, these are the principles we have. We haven't actually fully, because all bills, as Charles knows well, are redrafts and drafts and drafts as they go through a process anyway. Amy, sorry.
Yeah, and just to add to that, which Nessy explained very beautifully, is just to say that basically what we are going to really hold on to. So whether little bits of that change, or again we're kind of adjusting to really get that mechanism right, but there are always these checks and balances between, so it is the three working together. So say, you know, the recommendations from the Citizens Assembly had to go to Parliament for vote and debate. Well then, once the strategy has been put together, there's another revision by both government and the Citizens Assembly, and if either believe that it means we'll go over this 1.5, then they could say, hold on, stop, we need to revise this, we need to look at it again. So that's what we're doing. It's this very careful dance, but it does mean that it's not just consultative. They will be listened to, and it's being intended for by government, unlike the CA UK one that's currently going out. So this would be actually a really exceptional Citizens Assembly, and we're just tweaking exactly which bits go where, but there'll always be a check and a balance between the parties involved.
Great, thank you, Amy. I wonder if I can go to Charles with, there's three questions here of different aspects which are either not addressed in the bill or could potentially be criticised. So one is HS2. Have you considered adding a clause to scrap HS2 in the bill? I think this could work well, integrating the first do no harm principle and stopping HS2. That's already so unpopular and over budget in its tracks. So stopping it in its tracks. So HS2, should it be in the bill? One. Two, is it possible to require trade partners to follow certain rules? This has been done with medicines and foodstuffs. And three, are future technologies demonstrably likely to be insufficient? Is there a good reference for this? So we were talking earlier about not relying on these speculative technologies and that being within the bill. But can we back that up? I'm specifically thinking of counteracting arguments from friends that may say we don't need to worry because future technologies will sort this. So one, should HS2 be in the bill? Two, scrapping HS2 be in the bill. Two, requiring trade partners to follow certain rules. And three, what's the logic behind future technologies?
Am I on mute? No, I'm not on mute, am I? No, okay, great questions. I'm going to start with number two first, because yes, of course we can write into trade agreements rules. The problem we have is that we have a Brexit government and a very libertarian trade minister and junior minister who are not interested in writing rules into trade agreements, even when they promised to do so. I'm thinking of, you know, EU environmental and food standard rules, which are being jettisoned in discussions that are going on at the moment. Who knows if they'll go back in? But yes, we can demand them, and that, of course, is one of the other ways, or one of the ways in which this type of bill will be implemented, how its objectives will be reached. And so that takes it up to the first one of HS2, scrap it or not. The thing about particular projects is that once you start a list, it's very, very difficult to stop. And there are lots of very expensive, very unpopular with particular constituencies, mega projects that are exactly the wrong sort of development. This is where we get into the route map. What are the options? What are the different ways in which these various solutions, technological, investment, building, transport, agriculture, energy, whatever, can be put together like a jigsaw? And of course, there's more than one way. And so in the bill sets the overall aims and the objectives. And then there will be other decisions that need to be taken about particular projects like that to be able to implement it. Because if you go ahead with HS2, it makes it, or Heathrow's another one we could have written into the bill, it makes it so much more difficult to achieve realistic cuts in other sectors because of the knock-on effect. So what we tried to do with the bill was to keep the overarching objectives, and then those decisions have to be made elsewhere. And then finally, future technology is going to be sufficient. Well, the thing about the future is we don't really know what it's going to be. We know probabilities though. We know probabilities about the climate to very, very high degree, and all sorts of knock-on social and economic and ecological effects. We do know that there are technologies that are non-natural that would make machinery or buildings much, much more efficient, that could produce renewable energy in much less, well, across buildings, for example. There are lots of ways in which technology is going to be crucial. But I think it's sort of the back of your question is the idea of the futurists who say, look, technology will come in and rescue us. Why not just be stripping all this carbon out of the atmosphere? We already know how to do that. We've got the pilot projects. We can carry on polluting. Yeah, we're going to run into these sorts of arguments. And this is where we have to take them apart and dismantle them and demonstrate that that is a foolish path to go. Because to be able to stay within 1.5, we have to be cutting emissions this year, 2020, by something like, total emissions, something like 15%. Because every year we miss out on that, it becomes increasingly improbable, then impossible, to reach 2 degrees or 3 degrees. So we have to act now. We can't delay, as so much of government wants us to do, and certain industries want us to do, delay for some future miracle. God, aliens, future technology. No, we've got the technologies now. We need to implement them now. We need to regenerate nature now. We can do it. So that's what my answer would be.
Just to add to that I did read, there's a section, if you ever want to look at the 1.5 centigrade report from the IPCC, that's specific on the nets, and there's very much that kind of polemic about negative emissions technologies and about factoring them into the carbon budgets. So it's stated in that report that they're highly speculative, and also we don't know of the consequences of using them on nature, on the environment. Just to add that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nessy and Charles.
I hope I'm not talking too loudly, by the way. I sometimes get a bit excited and you know, apologies.
No, the volume's great, and a bit of excitement is very welcome, I think. So yeah, let's go back. There was one kind of overarching question about the campaign, maybe to move back to that side of things. Maybe put this to Amy. Do you have a sense of timescale about how the campaign might develop? Are there any specific events that are planned?
Yes, so I'm going to keep this short because I know we're already on, my clock says 7:28, and while I talk I'm just going to share this screen with you again so that you've all got it. Great. So we're really now, like I've said before, this is kind of an exceptional moment because we actually have a lot of grassroots lobbying power behind us, and that's with Extinction Rebellion, but it's also with everybody who's, you know, all these local authorities who have come forward to say, you know, there is a climate emergency. So we really are building, and this is really a good moment. So although normally these types of campaigns can take years, you know, 2-3 years, we really are, as Charles I think was saying in the chat there, we want to really zoom ahead towards COP and just try and get as many MPs as possible. I mean, the sky's the limit, and this is again back to you, is can we all do it? Can we all get our MP to support? And if we can, then we can move this forward at breakneck speed, which is ideally what we want. So that's a bit passing the buck back to you. And then, so the main things coming up to look out for are the website launching on Friday. This allows you to sign up to the campaign. Of course, we have got the Power of Extinction rebellion behind us, and we have got the rebellion kicking off at the end of August, but crucially that 1st of September date where we're going to be outside Parliament. There are things going to be going on, mass lobbying activities, whether that's mass ringing up at certain times, whether we're going into lobby, whether we're getting MPs out to come and talk to us. So basically just watch this space, because if you follow us on Twitter, if you look at the website, all of this will be advertised there. If you sign up, we will really keep in touch. So do keep in touch, and we really welcome and thank you for coming along this evening, and hope that we're really going to form a relationship between us and all get this going together.
Great, but can you unshare, Amy? So,
I can unshare. Have you all got that? And we can send through as well, I think, to all of you who signed up. We can send these details through too.
So I'm gonna, thanks very much everyone for all of your questions, and thank you to Nessy, Charles and Amy for your answers. I'm gonna hand back over to Nessy now to wrap up.
Thanks so much, Alex, and thank you so much to all of you for coming, and on this very sweltering night, staying for an hour and a half, or even those who couldn't quite make the whole hour and a half. This will be uploaded as a recording on XR, I imagine the channels, YouTube channels, across the social media channels, and of course then people will be free to share it, so just be aware of that. And really great thanks to Charles. We feel very privileged having Charles on our team, and it's a great sage.
Yeah, that's very sweet. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And we have a wonderful team, and we've had the most inspiring scientists, green economists, people from ecology. And we're just building and building. So we're just thinking of going from grassroots, but also from top down, bottom up. And then we will meet, and really, yeah, COP26 is that moment really of coalescence. So thanks so much, and over to Amy, because Amy, I couldn't do it without Amy.
Thanks, Nessy. Yeah, just a final shout out then is to say, if any of you are amazing at Twitter and fancy getting involved, do email. That's a final shout out. But yeah, thanks again, and yeah, amazing you're all here on such a hot night. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.